So before we start, please spend some time reading this disclaimer. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome back. Today is our third week of series 2 of ZinoBiotic. Today we're going to be talking about how ZinoBiotic and Protect can contribute to gut and immune health. It's actually a really big topic. I did a lot of research and I found a lot of information, but we've only got so much time, so I had to cut down a lot on the slides. And I hope in the future maybe I'll be able to share more with you. But tonight I've selected the most important information from my research. And I hope you'll learn something from it, which can help you in your own journey towards better health and help those around you and people you care about. So here is today's rundown. I'll first give an overview of our gut. As always, this is not a comprehensive introduction. Well, we've only got 30 minutes. So I'll give you some basics for you to be able to understand what we're going to be talking about later, and then I'll talk to you about probiotics and prebiotics. I'm pretty sure you've heard both of these terms before, but many people are still confused about them. So I'll tell you what they really are, and then I'll tell you more about ZinoBiotic, this amazing product here, and I'll tell you the importance of having a blend like ZinoBiotic instead of having just a single dietary fiber. And then we'll move on to talk about our immune function. If you remember from series 1, we actually talked about our immune system. So I won't be going too deeply into the basics, but I'll give you just enough overview, just enough review to help you understand what's going to come. And then the star ingredient of Protect is of course 1316 beta glucan, and we'll talk about how it can enhance your immunity. So without further ado, let's get started. So the gut, let me give you some interesting facts about our gut. So when you think about the gut, well, some people think about the large intestine, but then actually it's composed of both your small and your large intestines. And when people talk about the small intestine, they think that it's probably much smaller or shorter than the large intestine, but actually no, it's 3 to 5 meters long. It's actually more than double the length of large intestine. The reason why it's called small is it has a smaller diameter compared with the large intestine. And what the small intestine does is most of the digestion of the food we take in happens there, and the majority of absorption also happens in the small intestine. Whereas in the large intestine, water and mineral absorption happens there, and that is also where the majority of our gut flora live, and that will be the focus of tonight's webinar. So you might be wondering, why should I take care of the gut? I mean, they're gut, and they are part of my digestive system, and they can take care of themselves, no? Okay, if you remember our introductory talk, I actually told you that some functional medicine practitioners consider the gut to be the seat of our immunity. They think that more than 80% of our immunity actually lies in the gut. And if that is not enough, well, you might be interested to know that up to 90% of serotonin produced in our body is actually produced in the gut. And what do we need serotonin for? It's a very important neurotransmitter. If you have an imbalanced serotonin level in your body, in your brain, you could have depressive symptoms. And one more important reason to look after our gut is if you look at yourself in the mirror, you think you are you, but actually you are more than you. What do I mean by that? Because in this biosystem that we see as our body, we actually constitute less than 1/4 of it, because in our gut alone, there are more than 100 trillion bacteria there, compared with just 30 trillion cells in the whole human body. And in the gut, there are up to 1,000 different species of different bacteria and other microorganisms. So if you look at it from this perspective, we really are a minority. Well, I hope you're now convinced why you should take better care of your gut, because that holds the key to your well-being, to your quality of life. Because if you remember from last week, energy metabolism is very important, is implicated in your gut. And also, if you don't have enough serotonin, you will have depressive symptoms. Okay, so what is considered healthy, what is considered a healthy gut? At the end of the day, it's all about balance. So in recent years, nutritionists and other scientists have come up with a term, normobiosis, or as opposed to dysbiosis here. So what exactly does it mean? If you look at this picture here, you see a pair of scales. And that's exactly what it means. When you have more good bacteria than the bad bacteria, then you are in a state of normobiosis, meaning you're actually getting more beneficial benefits from the bacteria, from the good bacteria, than having, the damage, the deleterious effects from the bad bacteria. And the opposite is dysbiosis, when you have an imbalance in your gut, in your digestive system, where you have more harmful microorganisms than the good ones. So what causes dysbiosis? There are many reasons. As I like to say, people, especially city dwellers like us, a lot of us have an ultra-processed diet. We eat a lot of hamburger, fried chicken, fries, bagels, donuts. These things have been heavily processed, and they don't contain the nutrients that we really need for optimal physical function. So when these food items are so depleted of the nutrients that we need, what we're getting are just empty calories. And if we eat so much of these foods, especially the sugary stuff, we are actually feeding the bad bacteria in our gut, or the bad microorganisms. For example, there is candida, which is not a bacterium, it's a yeast, and it's bad for us, and it makes us crave sugary food. And apart from diet, there's also the issue of the abuse of antibiotics. These days, a lot of people, especially, I heard in America, it's very, very common to get antibiotics, from even just a regular doctor's visit. If you think you have an infection, even without a proper biopsy, a proper checkup, your doctor gives you antibiotics, and this is actually wreaking havoc on the ecosystem in your body. So some functional medicine practitioners say we have 10 to 12 layers of gut bacteria in our gut, and these are the good ones. But after even just one course of antibiotics, you can wipe out 6 or even more layers of these good bacteria, and they are so important for our immune function, and they help us digest food, and they produce vitamins for us as well. So antibiotics is a big reason. And then, of course, excessive alcohol intake, as we learned last week. If you drink a lot of alcohol, it can also impede your absorption of B vitamins, and then we've got poor dental hygiene. I'm still shocked to hear that there are still many people who don't floss their teeth, who don't brush their teeth at least twice a day. Poor dental hygiene can actually cause, it has been linked with high risk for heart diseases or even neurological diseases. So this is very important. And of course, stress, which we talked about last week, stress affects our immunity. And finally, residual pesticides from your fruits or your vegetables. Of course, these pesticides are there to kill bacteria. So if you don't wash your produce thoroughly enough, and you're ingesting them, this might have a harmful effect on the bacteria in your gut. So when we talk about gut bacteria, we really want to focus on the good types, which we call probiotics or symbiotic. There are 3 types. The first one is symbiotic, the good ones. So what do? They, like I said earlier, they help us by synthesizing vitamins, and they help us digest food, and they also stimulate our immune function. And one more very important function is they actually inhibit pathogens, pathogenic activity in the gut. For example, they can lower the pH value of our gut, which makes it less desirable for the for the pathogens to proliferate. And they can also secrete some antimicrobials, which can kill these pathogens, or they can crowd them off so they can no longer stay within your gut. And so some examples, well, these are the good ones. Some examples would be bifidobacteria and lactobacilli. And the most important one that we shall be looking at tonight is bifidobacteria. I'm sure you've heard of it before. Bifidobacteria is the probiotic that Yakult, the probiotic drink, is famous for. So, 而家
需唔需要？
你嗰邊聽？
No, that's
okay.
Peter, it's okay. Peter, when Master talks loud, it muffles the noise from the office next door, so no problems. If he just talks louder, that's fine.
But I can change the room right now for 30 seconds.
No, let's keep going. It's fine, mate. We'll do it for the next session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was the first type, and the second type is a group of bacteria that digest protein. So the good ones are usually those that digest carbohydrates, and these are the protein degrading ones. It's difficult to say whether they are good or bad because there are some good things about them, there are some bad things about them. For example, when they degrade protein, they can produce toxins, and these could be bad for us, and they could also lead to aging. And some examples would be Escherichia and Streptococcus, but we won't be focusing on them tonight. And then the final type is, of course, the pathogens, the bad guys. We see the bad guys here, right? They are the ones that will cause infections and all sorts of diseases for us. And these are the ones you've probably heard of before, Salmonella and Clostridium. Okay, so like I said before, the key to achieving normal biosis or good gut health is all about balance, because even if we're talking about a usually innocuous, unharmful bacterium, when it becomes dominant, when it goes out of balance, it could produce toxin, it could become pathogenic. So the key really is about balance, because it's simply impossible for you to be completely clean in an environment like this, and we're not designed to be like that either. If you've heard of people propagating, advocating, earthing, or there are people who actually think that being in contact, physical contact with the earth is good for us. And I agree with that, because you get a lot of good bacteria from the earth. And if you let your children play, with mud, with earth, they actually become, stronger in their immunity. So the key here is we need to learn to live in harmony with not just the good bacteria, of course, but also the bad bacteria, because if you really look at them, they are opportunistic organisms, meaning that they will always be there, but then they will only mount an attack on your body or on your immune system when your immunity is compromised. For example, when you didn't sleep well enough, or when you're under a lot of stress. So the most important takeaway is always look after your immune function, your immunity, so that you don't give a chance to these opportunistic microorganisms to attack you. Okay, so let's recap. What are the most important features of the good bacteria? They can ferment the carbohydrates that are not digested in our upper digestive tract. They produce short-chain fatty acids, which are very important because they're fatty acids, which means they will lower the pH environment in the gut, which will make it less desirable for the pathogenic bacteria, and it can also kill them. And these short-chain fatty acids also have other good benefits. For example, butyrate, which we'll talk about later, can actually kill tumor cells, and they are anti-inflammatory as well. And then to be qualified as a good bacterium, it cannot produce toxin that is bad for us, and it should normally it synthesizes vitamins for our body. And one very important criterion is on its cell wall there should be no lipopolysaccharide, meaning it is not a gram-negative bacterium, because lipopolysaccharide is inflammatory for us. And finally, it should compete with the pathogens. In what ways? It can crowd them out. It can take over the sites of the receptor sites on our gut, so that these pathogens cannot bind with us, and they can also lower infection by secreting other, for example, antimicrobials, or making the environment undesirable for them. So, like I said earlier at the beginning, a lot of you have heard about probiotics and prebiotics. So what exactly are they? It's very easy to distinguish between the two. Probiotics are the actual gut flora, the bacteria, the microorganisms, whereas prebiotics are their food. So what do? We feed probiotics to the we feed prebiotics to the probiotics. And what are prebiotics? They're usually non-digestible oligosaccharides. Oligosaccharides simply means it's a form of sugar. It has more it is longer, it has more molecules than simple sugars, but it's not as big as like starch. And resistant starch is also considered a prebiotic, which we'll talk about later as well. So let's look at the definition of prebiotics. There are 3 criteria that a food item has to meet in order to be considered a prebiotic. First of all, it cannot be digested in the upper digestive tract. Secondly, it has to be fermentable by the gut flora in our colon. And finally, the third point, which is the most important criterion, which is it has to stimulate growth or activity of good gut bacteria. So these are the 3 definitions, and a food item has to satisfy all 3 criteria in order to be considered a prebiotics. So we now know that all prebiotics are fibers, but not all fibers are prebiotics, because some of them do not stimulate growth or activity of good gut bacteria. Okay, so here are some examples of prebiotics from natural food sources. There are leeks, asparagus, and then we see here this is chicory, this is Jerusalem artichokes, and this is psyllium husk. And we've got asparagus here as well. And then these are the ones that you're familiar with: garlic, onion, and oats. So what are the functions of prebiotics? One very important function is they can be turned into short-chain fatty acids through fermentation by the good gut bacteria, because these short-chain fatty acids are very important. Like I said earlier, butyrate is a very important one because it can kill the tumor cells if you have any in your gut, and also it is highly anti-inflammatory, so it protects us. And also there are other short chain fatty acids like acetate and propionate as well. For example, they can induce the production of other beneficial chemicals in our gut. And since they are fatty acids, they lower the pH value, and then they inhibit pathogenic activity. And one very important function is they can help us, they can promote regular movement, regular bowel movement. Recently, I've heard people saying that after taking more fibers, they actually find it more difficult to have bowel movement. The reason for that is, when you take more fiber, you also have to take in more water, because if you take more fiber without drinking more water, this is a sure recipe for constipation. You need to have more water, at least double of what you usually take if you are taking a lot of extra fiber. Because, for example, a lot of the fiber that you take, so we've got both soluble and insoluble fiber. But if you take soluble fiber, but even for insoluble fiber as well, you need to take extra water to help them build up the bulk so they can move through your intestines. And then the next function is prebiotics can help you reduce infections, which we will see later in a study. And then if you remember from last week, we talked about these minerals: calcium, magnesium, and iron. Iron is the most common deficiency of any nutrient in the world. And then, of course, calcium and magnesium are very often deficient in a lot of people as well. So prebiotics can actually have been proven to help us improve mineral absorption. And also weight management, which we will also see in a study later, because it promotes satiety. Satiety is a feeling, it's feeling full. It's quite it's quite natural. When you feel full, you wouldn't want to eat more, right? So when you eat less, it makes it easier for you to manage your weight. So let's talk about ZinoBiotic. After my research, I'm more and more excited about this product. This product has 8 dietary fibers in it. So 3 types of resistant starch from corn, green bananas, and potatoes. Beta-glucan. This beta-glucan is different from the beta-glucan that we will be talking about later. This is a 1314 beta-glucan from oats. And then we've got inulin and fructooligosaccharides, both from chicory, which we saw earlier, and psyllium husk and guar gum. So, like I said, I am going to focus quite a lot of time on why it is important to have a blend, because it has so many beneficial effects for us. The first significance is if you have a blend rather than just one single dietary fiber, it can target the whole length of your gut. As we saw earlier, your gut is actually winding up and down and left and right. So and in different sections of your gut, there live different species of bacteria as well. And since it's quite long, we saw earlier that it's 1.5 meter long. We need different types of prebiotics to take care of the whole length. Why? Because different structures or different length of the prebiotics will determine the speed of its fermentation. If it's shorter in length or if it's simpler in structure, it can be fermented more quickly. But that also means if everything we take, if all the prebiotics we take are simple or short in structure, that means they will all be fermented at the beginning of the gut. Then there won't be any prebiotics left for the rest of the gut, which is why it's very important to target the whole length by incorporating different structures and different lengths of prebiotics. And one more important point is, usually rapid fermentation is associated with excessive gas and bloating, especially FOS, fructooligosaccharides, and that can cause gastrointestinal discomfort. So if you have a mix of them, you can minimize that effect. And also, the colon is a perfect environment for bacteria and for the activity, for the proliferation, because it's long, it has increased transit time. The transit time in the small intestine is quite short. It's only 2 to 4 hours, but the colon is much longer. And then there's also a lot more nutrient available for the bacteria there, because like I said, there are nutrients that aren't digestible by our upper digestive tract. The second tolerance, like I just said, the fast-acting ones, like fructooligosaccharides, well, they can be fermented very quickly, but they can also produce gas. So the key is determining different doses for the different types of prebiotics. So here we see a progressively complex and longer structure. So the shortest one is FOS, and then we've got inulin and guar gum, and then we've got 1,3,1,4 beta glucan, and the slowest one is actually the resistant starch. So this formula is actually really, really smart. It's so clever, and it's really based on science. After all my research, if you look at the grams here, you see that there's, well, the majority of it is resistant starch, and it makes a lot of sense because they are slowest acting, so you need more of them, so you can take care of the distal end, the far end of the gut. And also because studies have shown that FOS, fructooligosaccharides, can cause GI symptoms as little as just 10 grams, but resistant starch is highly tolerable by us. Even up to 50 grams, we don't see any symptoms. And resistant starch is very effective in increasing the bifidobacteria in our gut up to 10-fold. And they are the ones that are most important for us, for gut health. The third significance is there are different benefits. We see different structures and different lengths, so they will have different benefits. Some can lower cholesterol, some have anti-inflammatory properties, and some can increase mineral absorption. And then the fourth significance is we want to maximize the growth of good bacteria. So through incorporating different lengths and different structures of prebiotics, we can achieve this while minimizing adverse effects, because FOS can cause discomfort. And this study actually shows that FOS, or another form of oligosaccharides called oligosaccharides, actually are the fastest acting ones, and they also produce a lot of growth of the bacteria, but at the same time they have adverse effects. So you don't want to eat a large dose of it. But in this study, they also show that if you combine FOS with inulin, which is slower acting, you get the best growth as well. So this is the wisdom of this formula. You minimize the adverse effects while maximizing the benefits. So now let's take a look at some studies to see what prebiotics can actually do for us. Like I said earlier, weight control. This is, I'm sure a lot of you would be very interested by this. So it has been shown that if you increase your fiber intake by 14 grams per day over a 4-month period, your average energy intake will drop by 10%, meaning that you will tend to eat less, and that will result in a 2 kilograms weight loss. And the best thing about it is it doesn't matter whether it comes from food or supplement, you will still get the same benefits, which means that you can mix and match. You can increase your fiber intake by incorporating more supplements, but also at the same time having a healthier diet, eating more vegetables, more legumes, more pulses, and more fruits. And infection, well, we've been talking about it. Immunity, what does it do? How can it help us improve our gut health and immunity? This perfect example is traveler's diarrhea. It illustrates both its function, its enhancement of our immunity and our gut function, gut health, beautifully. This one. So if you take 10 grams of inulin per day, so this study had 244 healthy subjects. They were going to travel to a high-risk destination for traveler's diarrhea. Before they departed, they took inulin for 2 weeks, 10 grams per day, and during their travel, they also took it. And the study found that these people had reduced prevalence, so the occurrence of traveler's diarrhea was reduced, and even if it did occur, it was much less severe. So it shows that it can really up our immunity and protect our gut health. Okay, so that was ZinoBiotic. Now let's move on to the second part, which is immune function. So like I said, I won't be going over the basics a lot, but just enough for you to help you understand tonight's webinar. Tonight we will be focusing on the innate immune system. There are two immune systems, the innate and the adaptive ones, but we won't be going into the adaptive one tonight. So in a nutshell, your innate immune system provides broad spectrum protection for you. It doesn't need prior exposure. It can just protect you. They're like the soldiers who are, patrolling the borders of your country. And one very important immunomodulator is beta-glucan that is found in yeast and fungi. If you remember what we just talked about, we also talked about beta-glucan from oat. Okay, if you look at these two pictures here, you will see that, they are both beta-glucan, but they have very different structures. This is the one that are of interest to us now for this product, for Protect. And cereal glucan it's unbranched, it's linear, whereas yeast beta-glucan from baker's yeast is branched. And throughout human history, our body has always seen yeasts and fungi as threats, which is also why our innate immune system has developed a way to recognize yeast and fungal infection or attack. And we will be talking about that just a minute. Okay, so before we go into the details of how it can prime our innate immune system, let's talk about why our immune system is so weak these days. One of the main oh, by the way, I'd like to share with you that this part of the a lot of the information from this part of the presentation comes from Dr. Paul Clayton's book. So I'll show you a slide where you can see the cover of his book, and I highly recommend that you read it. It's an excellent book. So the major reasons why our immune system is not as strong as before is we are living in an over-sterile environment. We are just obsessed with sanitizing every day these days. And then also because of the invention of fungicide. These days, industrial agriculture just makes sure that all our crops are sprayed with fungicide, which means that there are no more yeasts or fungi on these on the foods we eat, which also means we have less of an opportunity to be exposed to these powerful and important immunomodulators. And also because of our diet, we used to eat a lot more fermented food, but we don't eat them as much these days. And also because of malnutrition, which I've talked about in the last two webinars. So now let's talk about 1316 beta glucan in Protect. What are they? They are actually complex molecules that you can find on the cell walls of yeasts and fungi. Oh, by the way, this is a book that I've just told you about, Strengthening Your Immune System by Dr. Paul Clayton. So these molecules, 1316 beta glucan, are actually the perfect chemicals or perfect molecules to prime your innate immune system. What does that mean? They can actually make your macrophages and neutrophils, which are cells of the immune system, they can make them ready, always ready. So when you have an invasion from, I don't know, like a pathogen, then they are ready to mount a counterattack on them. And at the same time, these molecules, beta glucan, can help our adaptive immune system to get ready as well. If you are interested in understanding more about how beta glucan works, which is actually a lot of biochemistry, which is why I've decided not to go into tonight, you can read Dr. Paul Clayton's book. He illustrates the principles behind 1316 beta glucan really beautifully and very clearly in his book. So I highly recommend you read it. But I would like to share with you some studies, mostly clinical and human studies, on how 1316 beta glucan can help us. First of all, since we're talking about immunity, an important marker of immunity is how often you get infected. And according to the Canadian Department of Defense, you see here, Chemical and Biological Defense Section, Canada. So they did a research. This is not on human, on mice. They gave mice beta glucan for 7 days before they exposed these mice to a lethal dose of anthrax. And what they found was half of the control group died, whereas all the mice in the glucan-treated group survived. None of them died. None of them, they all survived. And we're talking about a lethal dose of anthrax. So it's really, really very powerful in protecting us from, in enhancing our immunity. So now let's look at some human studies. I decided to choose studies that are more relatable to us, like everyday people. like us. So this study is about exercising. So we know that after strenuous exercise, we usually, our immunity is usually suppressed. And in this study, they sought to find out two things. A, they wanted to see the rate of upper tract respiratory infection, and they also wanted to see whether an immune marker, salivary immunoglobulin A, will be increased after supplementing with beta glucan. And after 28 days after a marathon, they found that if people took beta glucan, there was a 37% reduction in symptoms, in cold or flu symptoms. At the same time, in part B of their experiment, they found that they found a group of people and they asked them to do some exercise on a stationary bike, and they started taking beta glucan 10 days before the test, and they found that there was a 32% increase in IgA, a very important marker for immune function. So this study shows us that beta glucan indeed enhances our immunity in a very powerful way as well. And another marker for immunity is allergenic reaction, and this study looked at rhinitis. Rhinitis is actually inflammation of the inner nose, of the mucous membrane of your inner nose, which actually affects a lot of people. So they had 12 patients, and they gave them beta glucan for 12 weeks, and then they measured their markers, and they found that pro-inflammatory messengers decreased significantly in their blood, and also eosinophil significantly decreased, which is a marker of inflammation. So again, we're shown that beta glucan really is a very potent immunomodulator for our immune system. One more study. A group of researchers wanted to find out how far they could go with beta glucan. So they found a group of patients who were going to go into a high-risk operation, and they gave them beta glucan intravenously. So they injected it into their veins before the surgery, and they found that not only did they have a lower rate of infection, they also had a lower need for antibiotics, and they also did not stay in intensive care unit as long as they would have or as the control group, and they also had improved survival rates as well. So all these studies together showed us that what Dr. Paul Clayton said is right, because in his book he says that the US Department of Defense actually conducted survey on more than 300 powerful immunomodulators, and 1316 beta glucan constantly came on top, and it really is very powerful. So I'm very lucky to have come across this nutrient, and I'll make sure that I'll be taking it every day as well. So that's the end of my presentation today, and next week we will be talking about Viva and how it can improve your mood, your cognitive functions, and your mental health. And once again, thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and I hope to see you again next week. Thank you.